Welcome back, guys and girls, to another episode of Quick Tips. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about news versus structure. So firstly, my own personal take on news versus structure came with some experience. Quite often we see the news and we really let that influence our decision making with trading. We go onto Forex Factory and we look at what's coming out that week and we let it influence us. Now, it goes without saying certain types of news is something that we need to be aware of. But being paralyzed by the market just because there's CPI coming out or any other type of news is holding us back. And I'll explain why. I want to firstly start off with pound dollar and just give you all a perspective, because this really helped me, because I used to still feel that same way. I used to feel like I was almost paralyzed by the market and I would stay out of positions even though structurally they look really, really good. And it took me a little while to really get my head around it when I started doing my own back testing and realized that a lot of the times the structure is playing out anyway, and there happens to be news to fuel that agenda. So let's take a look at it. So pound dollar, we're going to start off on the weekly chart. So if we go to the weekly chart and we look at the whole structure, let's actually start back here and look at the side effect of why these price patterns and where we are positioned in the chart right now. So if we take a look at it and just look at the simple fact that we previously had this overall ascending channel, and as you can see here, that reversal type structure, we plummet. Of course, we have the 2008 crash, but we look at it so precisely with the 90% probability rule. Impulsive break, 90% chance that we'll get to the beginning of the correction until we either decide to create a deeper correction. Now, when we look at that and we see that impulse, we can see that what happened next, we just get an impulse and then we just get a pretty much 5-year correction as a continuation pattern before we get to the downside. So it comes as no coincidence why pound dollar is where it is, because we can see that happening years in advance, which is why I personally favor using market structure and patterns over the news. Now, there's one thing that we need to understand. It doesn't mean that people are not using news to create volatility. So when news comes out, naturally, sometimes it creates a little bit of volatility, sometimes it creates a lot of volatility. But you need to realize, how on earth could we know? Let's take a look at this. How would we know in this section here with Brexit that pound dollar was going to be going to the downside, right? The only way that we can know that is by looking at the previous pattern. So the reason why pound dollar is here is because this move to the downside is a side effect of this continuation, this impulse correction continuation. It just so happens, as pure coincidence, that there's big news that moves that in the direction, and that is where the volatility is. Now, when you look at the simple fact that impulse, correction, this is the Brexit, impulse, correction, continuation, impulse, and now this is the start of a correction to come to the downside. So notice how this is the reason why we've been looking at pound dollar from here for selling opportunities. This is why we capitalized on it, because we're looking back and seeing, well, it doesn't matter what news is coming out, whether it's big news or, minor news or medium style news, that is creating the volatility. But this has already been decided years in advance. We can see that. And I want to cast your mind to that, because I think a lot of people sometimes, especially for you new guys and girls, you're coming into Falcon and you're letting news influence your decision to take a trade. Then you're seeing it play out and you're thinking, you know what, I should have taken that trade. And that's just an old belief. It's an old habit. That's no fault of your own. That's just how you've learned. You've learned from taking trend lines from 7 years ago and thinking that they're relevant. I used to do exactly the same thing. What is actually relevant is the patterns. And what we can see here, by utilizing the structure and not focusing so much on the news, it's going to give you confidence. So as a trader, that's why it's important to you, because it gives you the confidence that what is actually happening versus what you thought was happening. And even when we look at these types of formations here, you can see we've got clear continuations, clear reversals. Even actually before the drop, we just have a typical Falcon style ascending channel before the impulse correction, impulse correction, impulse correction, impulse. So you can see it there years in advance. And that is why when you're trading and you're looking at the structures, it's going to give you confidence. So next time that you go on Forex Factory and you favor something, you think, you know what, I'm going to stay out because Draghi's speaking, that's really going to set in some realization that, hold on a minute, what's the structure telling me? Because that's more important. So if you're actually trading and then you're going back and back testing, so think of it like this: when you're back testing the chart and you're going back, are you back testing every single pattern, every single structure, and cross-referencing that with news? It's unlikely, right? Because the reality of it is the pattern will play out anyway. It just means within that area, pure coincidence, there's some kind of news that creates volatility to move in the direction that's already decided. Now, what I want you to do, guys and girls, because this might be the first time you're hearing something like this, is to not just take my word for it on pound dollar. Go and backtest and just look at the overall structures of these patterns and these charts and look back for some important news in other countries, not just Brexit, other big situations, and see if there's patterns that clearly showed you that years and years in advance. I think this will be a game changer for you, and it's going to help with a number of things, mainly that clarity in the markets that you've been searching for, and the overall confidence that when you're trading the market, you actually know what's happening. You can actually see the picture. You can see what's happening within the structure, which is why when we're taking trades like pound dollar from this area, we've got a very, very good indication that this structure will be at this low. Why? Because the pattern and the structure versus what the news is telling us is far more accurate. And if it means within this area that this is the impulse and this is now going to develop into a continuation before we complete the 90% rule, then perfect. We're going to see that way in advance. So you can see how focusing on the patterns and the structure is far more important than the news. Be aware of the news. Of course, don't go in blind, but don't put so much emphasis on it that it actually paralyzes you from taking advantage of the abundance of opportunity that we have in the market. So I hope that helps, guys and girls. Just a quick tip there, just to give you some perspective, and I highly recommend as a practical step, you go and back test that on other pairs, just so you can showcase it to yourself, and that's going to be powerful for your subconscious brain and just increase your overall confidence within the market. So have an incredible week, and I'll see you in the next episode.